Welcome back. In this second video, I'll be showing you how to use the step-by-step lesson plan portion of the Core Knowledge Teacher's Guides for the science curriculum. Now, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to watch part 1, where we took a look at how to download the curriculum, as well as the materials you'll be using. We also took that tour of the introduction section of the Teacher's Guide, which contains important information you'll need to teach the unit to your student. Now, before we start looking at the example lessons, a quick reminder that you can download free daily work plans, other support materials, all of that's on my website, homeschoolworkplans.com. And we are, of course, today going to be looking at the Core Knowledge Science curriculum. And the Core Knowledge curriculum is generously available for free from the Core Knowledge Foundation on their website, which you can see here. And for these units, as you saw in video 1, you're going to be downloading the Teacher's Guide and the Student Reader from that website for each unit for the grade level you'll be teaching. Now, specifically for this video, I'm going to be using the second grade unit for electricity and magnetism as an example, but all Core Knowledge Science curriculum is laid out in essentially the same format. The teacher's guides all look basically the same from kindergarten all the way through the 5th grade that's available at this point. So once you've watched this video, you'll be able to navigate those teacher's guides, even if you're using a different unit or different grade level than I'm showing you specifically today. Okay, so let's get started on our detailed walkthrough of a couple of example lessons. This unit covering electricity and magnetism is one of 5 units scheduled for 2nd grade. Now, this unit has 10 lessons, and they're scheduled over 15 school days. So some of the lessons will stretch over multiple school days. You'll typically see science lessons lasting between 1 and 3 days. I think in 5th grade, there are a couple that last 4 days. And the schedule I've suggested you download from my website for free lays this out for you. So with that schedule in hand, you're going to know exactly what to cover each school day. Okay, so because there are a couple of types of lessons in the Core Knowledge Science units, I'm going to walk you through 3 examples. The first will be a lesson that primarily focuses on reading a chapter in the Student Reader and then discussing the material with your student. The second example will be a lesson that primarily involves an investigation, which is like a hands-on experience with an activity page. And the final example lesson will be short. I just want to walk you through quickly and show you how these multiple school day lessons are scheduled so you can get a feel for how those flow and know what you're looking for in terms of when to start and stop each day. All right, so let's start by taking a look at this free daily schedule I was telling you about. And here on Friday of week 28 for 2nd grade, you'll see that lesson 8 is scheduled. And this is an example of a lesson that is focused on a chapter from the Student Reader. Now you'll see here on the schedule, you'll be using the Teacher's Guide, or TG, lesson 8. And the title for that lesson is Magnets and Electricity. And right below that, you'll see that you'll be using the Student Reader, which is SR, chapter 6. And finally, on the last line, you'll use Activity Page, or AP 8.1. So let's jump to Lesson 8 in the Teacher's Guide. I'm going to show you how this lesson works. Every science lesson starts with an overview page just like this one. Right up here at the top, you'll see the big question for the unit, the lesson question, and the tie to the anchoring phenomenon. Okay, that last one is to help orient you at the start of the lesson to what the student has learned so far in the unit, and that information will serve as the jumping off point for this lesson. Now, just below that on the left, you'll see the learning objective. For this lesson on magnets and electricity, the learning objective is to compare and contrast an electric motor that makes a fan spin with a spinning generator that produces electricity. So they both spin, but they do very different things. On the right, you'll see an overview of the instructional activities for this lesson. So in this case, you'll be reading aloud to your student from the Student Reader, and then you'll discuss the information together. Now, a little further down, you'll see the core vocabulary for this lesson, as well as suggestions for vocabulary you should try to use when discussing these concepts with your student. This idea of engaging students with scientific vocabulary is really laying that groundwork for long-term scientific literacy. On this next page, at the top on the left, you'll see a list of the instructional resources, and on the right, the materials and equipment you'll be using for this lesson. Since this lesson is mainly focused on the Student Reader, the list is limited to Chapter 6 of the Student Reader, Activity Page 8.1, which is going to be reinforcing that learning around motors and generators, and you'll be using the Core Knowledge Science Online Resources website to view some images and videos during this lesson. And then right below all that information, you'll see the start of the core lesson. Now, these lesson plans are laid out in a very orderly manner. You'll see right there at the top is your first task to focus your students' attention, and there are 2 specific items listed there to discuss. The first one is to remind your student of the big question for the unit, and the second is to tell them that to answer that question, they need to learn what makes electricity possible, and then you'll tell them the question for today's lesson. Next up, you'll be guided through reading Chapter 6 together from the student reader. And over the next few pages for this lesson, you'll be guided step by step on which important concepts to call out on each page and suggestions for questions you can ask your student to ensure they're comprehending and retaining the material. Now, while you're working your way through the step-by-step instructions for reading aloud and discussing the material, you'll see these Know the Science sections. These sections are for your development as a teacher, and they provide deeper information on the concepts. Our ability to better understand the scientific ideas in each chapter can really help as we discuss the information with our student. So ideally, if you can, try to read through the lesson the night before, particularly these Know the Science sections, so you can be well prepared to teach the lesson. Don't worry if you don't really remember the science you learned in school. These sections of the teacher's guide are going to be really helpful for getting you up to speed. Now, once you finish reading the student reader aloud and discussing the questions listed in the lesson plan, you'll move on to step 3, which is to demonstrate the concept using more examples. So in this case, you'll be watching a video on a hand crank generator, and you'll be asking questions to help lead your student to a better understanding of how the hand crank works and how power is generated. The video you'll be using is located on the Core Knowledge Science Online Resources website, and you see a link right there to the website on the lesson plan in the red circle. So clicking that link brings us to this page, which lists all the science units Core Knowledge offers. Now, this is a partial picture of the page. There are many, many more units than this that are listed here. This website is one of my favorite parts of the Core Knowledge Science programs. There's one of these for the history curriculum too, and these are great. Core Knowledge has taken the time to gather all sorts of resources, including images and videos that are used to bring such richness to this program. All those resources are organized by unit and lesson on this resources website. The lessons in the teacher's guide will prompt you when you need to visit this site and which resource to click on. Okay, so you don't need to worry about figuring out in advance what you're going to be using. The teacher's guide is going to tell you exactly what you're going to go to this website and view. Okay, now don't worry about bookmarking the website at this exact moment. It's always listed in the teacher's guide when you need to access it. Although I would recommend you save the link at some point in your browser because you're going to be accessing it a lot. All right, so to find the video we need for today's lesson, we're just going to click on the title of the unit we're working on. So that's electricity and magnetism. And that will download a PDF document with links to the different resources for this unit. Now you'll see right off to the left-hand side, there is the teacher's guide page number and the lesson number that refer to the resource. So you have multiple ways here of figuring out what you need. All right, we'll click on the one for the hand crank generator video, which will take us to a website to watch that video. All right. So then we'll go, after we've watched that video, we'll go back to the teacher's guide and we'll now look at step number 4 for the lesson, which is focused on checking for understanding. Now the steps in this portion of the lesson are to first have your student work through the activity page. So let's take a quick look at that activity page. There are a variety of types of activity pages in the Core Knowledge Science units. There are pages like this one that help the student review key vocabulary words. There are pages like we'll see in a few minutes where the student draws something and explains how it works. There are pages that help students learn to document their science experiments. Now keep in mind, these worksheets are always found in the back of the teacher's guide, and you can print them, and you should print them in advance. And then the answer key for all the worksheets is also always in the back of the teacher's guide. All right, so once your student has completed the activity page, you'll review their answers and discuss the concepts listed under the formative assessment. And finally, you'll check the student's answers using that answer key in the back of the teacher's guide. All right, so that's how it works for a student reader focused lesson where your main task is reading the student reader, discussing with the student, maybe looking at some of those additional resources such as videos, and that is the lesson for that day. So let's move on and look at a different type of lesson, what I refer to generally as an investigation lesson. So let's look at what that will look like. So let's start by going back to that free daily schedule I was telling you about. So here on Monday of week 29 for second grade, you'll see that lesson 9 is scheduled. This is the next lesson in this unit from the one we just looked at. Okay, so this is an example of a lesson that is focused on a hands-on investigation and an activity page. Now, you'll see here on the schedule that you'll be using Teacher's Guide or TG Lesson 9. The title of that lesson is Magnets and Rotating Motion. And then right below that, you'll see that you'll be using Activity Page or AP number 9.1. So let's jump to Lesson 9 in the Teacher's Guide, and I'll show you how this lesson works. So just like the last lesson, this first page will list the lesson question, the anchoring phenomenon for this lesson, and in this case, the student will be looking at whether the push of a magnet can make something rotate. The anchoring phenomenon ties this back to what the student read in the last lesson we just looked at about how magnets are used to create electrical current, and the hands-on investigation for today's lesson will have them assembling a simple device that uses magnets to induce rotation. Doesn't that sound like fun? So you'll see that this lesson will involve you as the teacher demonstrating a concept and the student conducting an investigation. All right, just like the last lesson we looked at, on this next page, you'll see that list of resources and equipment needed for this lesson. Now, at the top of the activity page, the activity page is listed, and then next to it is the list of equipment you'll need. Now, a quick reminder that, like we talked about in the first video, there is a master list of equipment for every lesson in the introduction section of the Teacher's Guide. And so when you first start a unit, you'll want to take a look at that and try to gather as much of this stuff in advance as you can. All right, now I do want to point out that this lesson requires quite a bit of advanced preparation. I've circled that in red there for you. And it's always a good idea to read through these lessons the night before so you can handle any advanced work that is needed. Now, in this case, you'll be assembling a very simple visual aid. And keep in mind that these instructions for advanced prep are really written for classroom teachers who need to have their preparation work done in advance. Otherwise, right, they have 30 kids who are going to be doing who knows what while they're trying to get their work done. Okay, so with homeschooling, though, we can be more flexible than we can teaching in a classroom. So if you don't have time to do your advanced prep the night before, it's okay. You can build this little thing with your student too. They'd probably enjoy that. All right, now right below that we have the beginning of the core lesson. And just like the last lesson we looked at, this lesson plan is going to guide you through step by step how to present this information to your student, starting with how to focus their attention on the lesson question. And then right at the bottom, there again, we have one of those Know the Science sections that are really helpful to us as parents and teachers so that we can get that background information to make this lesson go smoother. Next, you'll be guiding your student through the investigation. And again, this is laid out very carefully, step-by-step manner, so you know exactly how to work through this activity with your student. There's literally step 1, step 2, step 3, right there for you how to conduct this investigation. Now, you'll distribute the materials, you'll work carefully through the steps, and the lesson will guide you through setting correct expectations for your students so they'll know what's supposed to happen once they've built this project. Now, on the next page, you'll find helpful troubleshooting information in case the project doesn't quite work as intended. There's also additional options listed for providing extra challenge and extensions for the investigation. If you have one of those kids who needs that extra challenge, needs a little bit more, that is there for you as well. Now, please don't feel like, though, that you have to complete these extra options. They really are meant to be used when a student really needs additional challenge in their work. All right, next up, we have step number 3, which is to discuss the results. And you'll be doing this using activity page 9.1. So let's take a quick look at that activity page. For this activity page, your student will be drawing the rotation device they made in the investigation, and then they'll answer 2 questions about how it works. And you'll use this activity page to discuss the project with them to ensure they correctly understood the material. Now, on the final page for this lesson, you'll again be using that online resources website I showed you earlier, and you'll be using it to access a video about how motors work. So after the video, you'll move on to the Check for Understanding section at the end of the lesson, where just like last time, you'll review the lesson concepts and check in with your students' answers on that worksheet using the answer key that's always located in the back of the teacher's guide. Okay, so that was an example of an investigation-focused lesson. So let's move on to the last type, which is a multi-day lesson type. Now, you're at this point familiar with the various components of these lesson plans. So we're going to move through this one a little more quickly. My goal is really just to acquaint you with how these lesson plans are laid out when the lesson occurs over multiple school days. Okay, so we're back at the daily schedule. And here on Wednesday, week 29, you'll see that lesson 10, day 1 is scheduled for Wednesday, and day 2 is scheduled for Friday. Now for Wednesday, you'll see here on the schedule that you'll be using Teacher's Guide Lesson 10, and the title for that lesson is Science in Action, A Day with an Electrician. Right below that, you'll be using the Chapter 7 of the Student Reader, and then for Friday's lesson, you'll be using the Teacher's Guide and not the Student Reader. So you see the difference there? Okay, so let's jump to Lesson 10 in the Teacher's Guide, and I'll show you how this lesson works. So this lesson will flow just like the other two I showed you, except you'll notice two things here. First, under the on the left-hand side there, in the red circle, under the instructional activities section on that first page, you'll see it is listed as 2 days. Generally, these multi-day lessons are either 2 or 3 days, very rarely 4 days. All right. On the right-hand side in that red circle, you'll see the next page there, it's day 1 under the core lesson. And you'll see the first 2 parts of the day 1 lesson are listed right there. So introducing the concept and reading Chapter 7 of the Student Reader aloud to your student. Now this chapter is focused on introducing the student to an electrician and understanding what their job entails. And just like the previous lessons, the lesson plan is going to guide you through step by step, reading the material and discussing it with your student. Now, that day 1 lesson using the Student Reader continues for several pages, but eventually you'll arrive at the end of the day 1 lesson and you'll see day 2 listed, just like there on the left in the red circle. So for the day 2 lesson, you'll be guided through a simple investigation activity involving removing the plastic off a wire to see what's inside. And you'll then discuss that with your student in the information that they learned about wires that electricians work with. And you'll finish up that lesson by using the formative assessment section to check your students' understanding of the material. Now, before we wrap up this video, let's take a quick peek at the teacher resources section at the end of this unit's teacher's guide. For the science units, this is where you'll find all the activity pages for the unit so you can print them, as well as the answer key for the activity pages. Now, a quick note on unit assessments. If you're using the Language Arts and History and Geography curriculums Core Knowledge offers, you may be wondering when the unit assessments for these science units happen. So here's the thing. Not all science units have those assessments, but when they do, they are built into one of the final lessons for the unit, or they are specifically scheduled, and the documents for that are in with the activity pages. And those assessments for the science units, I did want to mention, they're really well done and they really are a great way to wrap up the unit. So I have them listed on the daily schedule you'll download from my website when they are part of the unit. And I would really encourage you to take that day and work through the assessment with your student. Okay, so that concludes our tour of the lesson plans portion of the Core Knowledge Science Curriculum Teacher's Guide. So before we finish up, a few quick reminders. First, remember all Core Knowledge Science Curriculum Teacher's Guides are laid out in essentially the same way. So this video might seem like a lot of information, but I promise that once you get the feel for this, you're going to be in a much better position to navigate any of these science units for any of the grades. Next, be sure to download those organization and prep documents from my website. They're free resources. I've done all the scheduling and organization work for you, and that daily schedule is really useful, especially for the science units where some of these lessons stretch over multiple days. So with that free daily schedule, you'll always know what you need to do each day. I also have more videos available on both my website and YouTube channel. My goal is to help you provide your children with a high quality, affordable education at home. So I have a lot of tips and how-to videos to do that. All right, so that's it for this video. Best wishes on your homeschooling journey.